Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you happen to be in the world today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to attend this latest bootcamp session, where we're continuing to focus on the MSP sales process. So this is part 2 now of my 3-part bootcamp series that started last month. And then part 3 is taking place in a couple of weeks at the end of August. If you happen to have missed part 1 that took place last month, you can find a copy of that recording within the Head Nerd section, within my own section of Enable You. If you've never attended any of my boot camps in the past, my name is Stephanie Hammond. I am the head nerd here at Enable that's responsible for all things sales and marketing related. I've been with Enable for almost 20 years, and so during that time, I've had a lot of different roles at Enable. And then I moved into the head nerd role about 4 years ago. So you can see my contact information is there on the screen, my email. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you're on LinkedIn, we should be linked together. So looking, kind of at the objectives, what we're going to be covering off in today's session, really what we're going to be talking about is the benefits of following a proper assessment process and why you want to implement a repeatable process like this. If this is something that you're not currently doing today, or if you're not conducting this on kind of a more consistent basis. So we are going to review the different steps that make up the prospect assessment process, focusing on what happens at each step, outlining why it's so crucial to be thorough with this stage of the sales process and not rush through or skip any of these steps. And so the purpose of today, I'm going to be focusing on theory. So I'm not going to lie, this is kind of a heavy course, because it is going to be focused on theory and the processes behind conducting an assessment like this, and it is tools agnostic. When I wrote this boot camp last year, I was anticipating that we would actually be able to tie in a tool to kind of go through, a specific maybe tool that Enable was going to have, and how you can combine the theory with the tool to conduct this step. But Enable doesn't have a tool yet. So really what I want to do is just really focus on the theory behind this, and the different steps, and why you want to complete each of these steps. And it's probably not a bad idea that I am making this tools agnostic, because when I was preparing this boot camp, working with different MSPs, interviewing them, the MSPs that have a really good assessment process in place today, they basically told me that they started off like what I'm talking about today. They didn't have any tools. It was a very manual process for them in the beginning, because they needed to understand, what that process was going to look like, so that they then could understand, okay, what tools can we then invest in to help with really the data gathering, the data analysis part. So they needed to have a fundamental understanding of what that manual process would look like, so they could have a better understanding of what tools they could then implement after that. So, if you're thinking that I'm going to be talking about tool sets today, I'm not going to be pushing, I'm not even going to be mentioning any type of software today. And again, the other reason I think it's a good thing that this is more of a tools agnostic type of session is every MSP is different in terms of their size, in terms of their cash flow. And so another goal of today's session is to really make this part of the sales process accessible and possible, even for those MSPs that have to do this step manually, because they don't have that ability to really invest in a whole lot of tool sets at the moment. So again, kind of a long preamble about why this is going to be a heavy course and why I'm not going to be talking about any tools, because that has come up in previous feedback. So anyway, looking at what are going to be the key components that are going to make up your prospect assessment process. And there's really 2 parts that we're going to talk about that you're going to rely on to help you put together a compelling and valuable sales proposal. And that's really the goal of this, is we're implementing this step so you can collect some really good intel, some great pieces of information that you can then use in your sales proposal to help increase the odds that your customer is going to sign with you and maybe switch over from whoever they're using today. So we're going to be talking about the business review and the workflow assessment. This is where we're going to be talking to the key stakeholders to find out, kind of the what, where, when, how they use the technology that they do, how it fits into their specific role. You want to find out what's working well, what's not working well, what's preventing them from reaching their departmental goals, what are the challenges that they're experiencing, what are their priorities, really what would they love to see fixed. And then we're going to be talking about the cybersecurity and the data risk assessment process. And this I'm going to be referring to the CIS controls to help build that out. And this is really needed to determine, what holes exist within the prospect security policies, their procedures, whether they even have any security policies and procedures in place at all, along with, what are some of the gaps that you can find out or detect in their current cybersecurity protection coverage. Where are the gaps in the resiliency abilities that could potentially place their data and their intellectual property at risk should they be attacked. And so we're going to break down in that part of the boot camp each step to give you a better idea of what that complete overview would look like. And I'm probably going to be saying this a couple of times throughout today's session because it is an important point that I want to make. As tempting as it may be, especially if you do have a very impatient buyer, they're ready to kind of jump ship and sign with you today, it is super critical that you don't skip any of these steps in the process that we're going to be going through today or rush through this phase of the sales process. Because if you do skip steps, then there's a very large chance that you're going to miss something, right? And you're going to miss maybe the opportunity to mitigate risk, whether that's mitigate your risk or mitigate your prospect's risk. And also you could miss out on additional revenue opportunities because every single prospect that you speak to is at risk for a cyber attack. Attacks are more sophisticated, they're more targeted now than they've ever been before. Because when you think about cyber attacks, they're really designed to extract money from your prospect's business in any way possible. So this is really about being disciplined in your approach and being patient and being thorough. And then use the process to really identify, all of the risks that are present in your prospect's network, within their business environment, so that you can then show the value and the level of expertise that you bring to the table by partnering with you and by implementing, kind of the appropriate services and the programs to reduce your prospect risks. That's what's going to help reduce your risk as the MSP overall as well. But if you kind of rush through all of this and if you're missing on getting some of that critical data points, then you're not going to be able to put together as compelling of a proposal that could work to kind of help motivate that client to leave their existing MSP and then switch over to you, or you're not going to have the necessary intel that will be needed to overcome some of those common objections that you're likely going to hear from your prospect, especially when it comes to price, because your agreement, your monthly fee is likely going to be much higher than what your customer is probably paying for today. So you can need this data, collect this data so that you can help handle those pricing objections that you're going to get in the closing stage. And if you're doing this properly, then this is really giving your prospect the hints at what it's like to work with a real professional MSP that exhibits that security first mindset, because that's really ultimately how you're going to be able to differentiate yourself from your competitors. Okay, so before we start, I just want to launch a quick poll, finding out, from everybody on the line today, we're talking about assessments. Do you charge for your assessments? So I know this is kind of a controversial question. I think it's a question that's as old as time, but just do you charge? So yes, we do. No, we don't. It depends. All right, so give everyone a moment. Okay, all right, well, that was quick. Thank you, everyone. So it looks like people on the line are not currently charging for their assessments. So thank you. I appreciate you taking that opportunity to vote and let me know about that. I disagree with you because it is my belief that you should be charging your prospects for an assessment like we're going to be going through today. And I say this because the assessment, especially, you know, what I'm going to be going through today from a theory standpoint, is it is going to be a significant amount of work. It's going to take you time, and it should take you time to complete this. And likely to do it well, it is going to require the skill sets of probably like either yourself or your very best employees. So you want to be properly compensated for your time and for your efforts. And whether you charge for this work or not, I think it ultimately sends a huge message to your prospect on whether they should value your expertise or not. Because I think when you have to pay for something, it naturally holds an increased value in your eyes. Because again, the goal of the assessment is to really show the customer, show the prospect, you know, how much risk they have in their business and how much they deviate from your technology and from your security standards and your security best practices, and how that could be impacting the productivity and the safety of their employees, which is going to impact the revenue generating capabilities of their organization as a whole. So the assessment is really your opportunity to position yourself as that expert, as that authority figure in this space, and use your cybersecurity and your technology standards as your differentiator from other MSPs out there who may not be doing anything like this or to this extent that we're going to be talking about today. And if you don't charge for your assessments, your prospects are never really going to understand or appreciate that. So I really do feel strongly that MSPs should be charging for their assessments. And, you know, when you don't conduct an assessment in the first place, or if you don't charge for your assessment, you're really taking on a gamble on two fronts. You know, without an assessment, you could end up inheriting a chaotic, old, poorly configured IT infrastructure, and that's just going to make it more challenging for you to support profitably, you know, if you don't factor this aging network environment into your monthly contract costs. And if you don't charge for the assessment, then the prospect is really free to then take that assessment report and all that free consulting that you just provided them and go back to their existing MSP or maybe to another MSP, give them the report and then ask them for a cheaper quote to remediate the work that you've uncovered. And so by charging for your assessment, it also indicates and signals that commitment that, you know, both parties are engaged in this, you know, you as the MSP and the prospect as well, and that you're both serious and potentially working towards establishing a partnership. And so it kind of really cements that commitment from both sides. And lastly, you know, service leadership, they put out a benchmarking report every year. Their 2022 report found that MSPs that do charge for their assessments in that pre-sales process, they experience 1.5 times higher profitability than those MSPs that don't charge for their assessment. And this is because MSPs that charge for their assessments, they're attracting a higher quality, more strategic type of prospect that's more likely going to conform to your technology and security standards that you really should be enforcing across all of your customers. And so by charging for your assessment in this pre-sale stage, this is going to help hopefully eliminate some of those price sensitive or those cost conscious type of buyers from your prospect pool. And it's going to leave you with those prospects that really you actually do want to have as clients anyways, because if a prospect is willing to pay for your assessment, then they're more than likely going to be willing to pay what you are charging for the services that you offer. But, there's probably going to be some objections that we're going to have to deal with, as you go about trying to implement your assessment process. With the first one, likely, what, I'm considering a couple of other MSPs as well. They're not charging an assessment fee. Why should I pay for yours and go with you? And so a possible response, if you hear this, is you can say, yeah, agree. A lot of my competitors do offer a free assessment. But think about it. To offer it for free, they're likely sending their least talented IT person to do the work, who may not be well versed or well trained in cybersecurity. And in the interest of time, they're probably keeping it short. They're just scratching the surface, especially when it comes to something as serious as cybersecurity. In contrast, our assessments are conducted jointly by a business analyst and a technical analyst who are going to work together to assess the safety and security of your network infrastructure, because our goal is to help our customers avoid becoming an attack target. And so our assessment process is designed to highlight deficiencies in your network so that we can then put together a corrective plan of action. And this whole process requires a level of expertise and proficiency that our prospects are willing to pay for. Because I think, and again, I don't mean to be controversial, I think a free assessment is worthless. If you don't place a value on it, how can you expect your prospect to place a value on that? Your time is valuable. You're a professional. You should be treated as such. Professionals are experts in their field, and they charge for their services, and they charge for their advice and their guidance. They don't give away their time and their expertise for free. And so by having your prospect pay for your assessment, it means that they're serious about engaging with you, and they're serious about wanting to solve, whatever their current predicament is that's causing them to look at another MSP in the first place. And then if you don't request payment, then that relationship starts to become lopsided as well. It becomes unbalanced. You could be putting in all this time and energy, and then the prospect could just ghost you without warning. And so also by requesting payment, you're signaling that you're taking this engagement just as seriously as they are, and that you are really committed to doing what you can to solve their IT problems, their security problems in the most efficient and effective means as possible. And so you could really look at this as turning your assessment process into a competitive advantage for your MSP and for your market. You also may get the objection to say, wow, this kind of seems excessive. Is this really all necessary? And so again, another possible response you can give, you can say something like, what, times have changed. Many businesses have never put money into IT like this before, but it is necessary. The hackers are just really, really smart now, and they're just getting smarter. And it isn't really about if you're going to be breached, but it's more about when these days. So we want to make sure that when you do get breached, we can get your data back. We can get your business back online quickly and as efficiently as possible when it does happen. And we want to be able to identify, what are all of those holes? What are all those gaps in your current setup that you may have with your existing MSP, so that we can use that to identify what your true risk exposure is. And again, that's what's going to allow us to put together the best course of action, the best suite of services to help reduce and mitigate your risk exposure, and to make your employees and your organization better protected and more secure. And that's why all of this is necessary, because we can't protect what we don't know about, and so we need to be thorough. Okay. All right, so looking at the first part of the assessment process, we're going to be talking about the business review and the workflow assessment. And when we look at this, a business assessment is really an objective and unbiased analysis of your prospect's business that's really designed to provide that clear picture of where your prospect's business currently stands, where it's going, and what factors might be impeding its growth. And the goal is really to gauge how well your prospect is at managing and executing in the areas of the organizations that are pretty much impacting the bottom line or influencing growth. and to determine, where you might be able to insert your MSP and your services to help meet their growth and their business objectives. The goal really here is to pretty much find out, how does that organization make money? And if you can, try and find out, what does their revenue structure look like? Though admittedly at this stage, it might be a little bit more difficult to figure that out, but really trying to get that understanding of how does that business grow, how do they make money, and what's important and necessary for that growth. And because again, if we can figure out what that revenue structure is, this is going to give us insight of where they could potentially be at risk. And so if they fail to implement proper protection protocols that you are recommending, but maybe their existing MSP is not, then this is something that you can incorporate into your sales proposal to help give your sales proposal a lot of meat, a lot of beef. And also, as part of this section, you want to gain an understanding of what the prospect's business goals and objectives are. You want to review what their current and what their future plans are to growth. That's going to take their business further than it is today. So again, we want to use our assessment process to highlight where are limitations in that, when it comes to their technology setup that might, again, impede that desired growth that they're looking to achieve, and where their challenges are going to be in trying to meet those growth objectives. And so again, this is where you're going to be able to make your recommendations in your sales proposal, and you can talk about how your MSP can help address those limitations that you've uncovered for them. And you're also going to want to speak to all the key stakeholders of the company to find out how and why they use the technology that they do. How does it fit into their specific role? How does it fit into their job function? And so conducting a workflow assessment is going to be very important, so that you can identify, where are some operational inefficiencies currently exist that, again, could be impeding their productivity. And that's going to allow you to really get a good understanding around how would their day-to-day be impacted if the technology that they relied upon went offline, or if they weren't able to do the work that they needed to do. Because again, the overall goal of this is to use this information to really help justify, the cost of downtime for them, help them with an ROI, so that when you need to present your monthly fee, as part of your sales proposal, you have all this data to kind of back that up. So how do you go about completing this part of the assessment process? There's really 4 points or 4 components to it. The first section is we want to conduct what we call a GPCT analysis. This is where we're going to work to get an understanding of the organization's goals, their objectives, their plans, any challenges that they may be experiencing, along with whatever their expected timelines are. Then we are going to conduct that workflow analysis, so we can gain that understanding around how are those, key stakeholders, those critical end users, how do they interact and utilize technology in their day-to-day function. We want to gain an appreciation around the impact that any sort of downtime would have on their deliverables to the organization, because an organization suffers when their employees are rendered unproductive, because of unexpected downtime or workflow inefficiencies. So to put your recommendations together, we do want to get an understanding around, what are those day-to-day activities and what are those processes that the key stakeholders are involved in. And then we do want to do kind of a general technology assessment and review of their existing IT spending. Maybe you need to look at what their vendor contracts look like so you can see what they have, and then determine if any improvements or changes might need to be made. And if they really do have a realistic IT budget in place when it comes to their IT spending. So looking at the first type of business assessment, this is the GPCT analysis. Again, we want to work to get an understanding of the organization's goals, their objectives, their plans, challenges that they're experiencing, and their timelines. Now, if you attended last month's boot camp where we talked about the discovery process, so stage 1 of the sales process, you would have heard me talk about the BANT line of questioning, or the BANT questioning technique. And so in that boot camp that I delivered last month, we talked about the importance of getting a good understanding of the prospect's, budget, who has authority to sign off on a new contract, what are the prospect's needs, what are their timelines, and that was all part of that qualification stage. With today, where we're talking about the GPCT framework, what we're doing is really kind of building on that. We're striving to get a more in-depth and better understanding of what is really important to the prospect. And that's what's going to allow us to kind of put together that more comprehensive business proposal when we get to the last stage or the next stage of the sales process. So you may have some of this information already collected. Fantastic. But so we can use this to really maybe confirm what you've already collected, or maybe if you found that your qualification stage wasn't as thorough as you needed it to be or as what you liked it to be, then this is kind of your second kick at the can to get the information that you need. Another thing that I did talk about in last month's boot camp, and I think it warrants bringing up again in today's boot camp, and you'll probably see it in next week or the following week's boot camp as well, is as you are conducting your assessment, make sure that you do a good job and that you're diligent about capturing your prospects' direct quotes as you are speaking with them, as you are speaking and asking them questions about their business and what they're looking to achieve. Anytime they tell you something important about what matters to them and what matters to their business, write it down. Make sure it gets recorded somewhere, because this is going to be highly beneficial when you get to the proposal stage and you get to the presentation stage of the sales process. Because if you're able to present them, with a proposal and they're able to see their own direct quotes kind of sprinkled throughout it, they're going to know that you do understand and fully grasp their business, their objectives, and what the requirements are. Because unfortunately, they may not fully believe what you tell them because they know that you are ultimately just trying to sell them something. You're trying to win that sale, but they're not going to disagree with, their direct quotes and sentiments that they expressed to you. So you do want to be able to capture these expressed needs in their own words, and then be able to, kind of throw the words back at them, restate these words back to them exactly as they said them, in your proposal document. So when you get, any objections thrown at you, you can kind of use their words and say, well, you told me this, is this no longer important to you? And so it's going to help, jog their memory what they've already told you. So as you can guess, there's really 4 steps to the GPCT process. For each step, I've outlined certain questions that you're going to want to ask when you're speaking to your prospect. You're going to see all of this and a lot of the information that I'm talking about today. There's a handout that I've included in the handout section that I call the Prospect Assessment Process Workbook. This is a big Excel spreadsheet. It's not fancy, but really what it's just meant to do is to kind of capture all of the questions, all of the process that I'm talking about today, and try and put it into a structured format for you. You are then free to amend that format, amend that workbook in any way where it makes the most sense for you. Because again, as you start working through this, especially for those that are saying, maybe you're not doing assessment, you're not charging for your assessment, as you get going with this, you're going to begin to refine your process. And so this is just really meant to give you that jumping off point with something, if this is something that you're not used to doing today. So make sure that you download that, excuse me, make sure that you download that workbook if that's something that you think you'll find valuable. But the idea behind this GPCT framework is, again, we want to find out what your prospect is planning to do, how they're planning to do that, what roadblocks they might be facing, and what issues they need help with, help resolving. And so step 1 is really that, again, understanding your prospect's goals, the objectives, what outcomes are they looking to achieve. We probably already asked these questions in the qualification stage, but if you didn't get that complete picture of the prospect's end goals and their expectations at that time, then this gives us, again, that second kick of the can to use this stage of the sales process to get that good overview around what are their end goals that they have for their organization. So asking questions like, what's the vision? that the prospect has for their company, what's their big picture overview, what goals, expectations does the C-level team have for their business currently? If we look ahead, what are their top 3 initiatives that they like to complete? Can they give you some information around what their revenue goals are like? What business metrics are they using to help measure the achievement of these goals? Finding out if they have any major initiatives coming up. Is there any planned mergers or acquisitions, any big office moves, any new product or service offerings for their clients that they're working on, that they're launching? And then out of all of this, what's their top goal? What's their top goal that they need to get taken care of or meet maybe within the next 6 to 9 months? And then looking at, how does technology play a role in all of this and helping the organization meet its organizational goals? And then asking the people in the room, what are their personal goals? Do they have any professional goals that they want to achieve for themselves or maybe for their department for the year? And by bringing it down to the individual level, generally people are very passionate about their goals. So if you can get a good understanding of them and how it relates to them, it's going to then be easy to kind of keep the rest of the conversation really focused around, helping them achieve what their personal and professional goals are. Then looking at step 2, once you have a good understanding of what the prospect's end goals are, what they're aiming to achieve for the business, then we need to kind of figure out, well, what plans are in place right now to help them reach those goals or those personal or professional goals that they've outlined to you. So trying to find out, what those plans are. Have they developed any plans to help them reach those goals? Have they started engaging in any activities focused on implementing those plans? And if they have, finding out, what those implementation steps have been, see if you can review them, and then you can advise of whether maybe the steps that they're currently undertaking are actually beneficial and helping them to successfully reach their goals or not. And then, asking them if they, maybe there might be a better way to achieve some of those goals than maybe the plans that they have in place today. Because maybe if you feel that they could do something a little bit differently, or maybe they can do things a little bit more efficiently or effectively, then those are fantastic recommendations that get included into your sales proposal, where you can say, this is your goal, this is your plan, this is what you're doing today. But I think there's a better way that we can look at that. And here's our suggestion. You build that into your sales proposal. And then step 3 is all about getting a prospect to identify any challenges, any struggles that they might be experiencing and trying to accomplish, whatever their stated business or personal goals are. Again, helping them to recognize that maybe they might need a new approach, or maybe they might need a better approach in how they're tackling things, that they truly do want to achieve the outcomes that they're looking for. Because this is really about, maybe getting them out of their comfort zone, helping them or getting them to move beyond their status quo. Because obviously if they're talking to you, the status quo isn't cutting it any longer, right? And if they continue down that path that they're traveling, that could possibly inhibit them from actually ever reaching their stated goals. And so looking at some other questions that you can ask at this stage, ask them about their business challenges that they might be facing that might be hindering their ability to meet their goals, asking if they feel that their team that the MSP has in place today, are they skilled enough to properly deal with these challenges that we're talking about today? And if these are still challenges that they've been facing, and if these are challenges that they've been facing for maybe a year, 2 or more, why do they think that they haven't been able to overcome these challenges yet? What factors do they keep running into that prevent them from accomplishing their goals? And then step 4 is really getting that understanding around, what's their urgency around getting these goals or these plans or these challenges taken care of, because you need to know this so that you can have a better understanding as to what helps you better set expectations, right? Like if you can get an idea around what their timeline is, then you'll have a good idea around, is this something that's going to happen in the near term, medium term, or maybe this is even a longer term deal that you might have to nurture, which is going to help you set expectations when it actually comes to the buying decision. So asking questions around, what's the urgency behind meeting these goals? We're looking for next month, next quarter. Is this kind of a next year or a longer term thing? What's the priority of the goals that you've stated today compared to other organizational goals that you might have for the business? And then making sure that we're including some business impact line of questioning here to really help the prospect understand, what the consequences would be and what the implications would be if they fail to meet the goals that they've stated to you. So asking them something like, Mr. Prospect, what happens if you don't meet the goals that you've indicated are important to you? Because we want them to really articulate, and this is stuff that we can put into our proposal, you want them to articulate what the status quo would look like if nothing changes. And if nothing is done to solve these challenges that they're telling you about. And so seeing if you can draw out from them, is there going to be a monetary cost? Is there going to be a performance cost associated with them not taking action that you can then highlight and bring back into the conversation when we start trying to close the deal? And so this is where you then have the ability to really demonstrate your expertise and talk about how you've helped other similar businesses in the same kind of situation achieve their goals in the past just via by virtue of partnering with you. And then looking at the workflow analysis. And so this is where we want to get an understanding around, how the critical end users, the key stakeholders, how are they interacting, how are they utilizing the technology presently, or maybe how they're not using the right technology, depending on how the case may be, as part of their day-to-day function. So again, we can gain that appreciation around what would the impact be if there was any sort of downtime that impacted their deliverables to the organization. Because employees are expensive, they are the #1 cost of any organization. And so the organization suffers when their employees are rendered unproductive because of some sort of unexpected downtime, some sort of cyber attack, workflow inefficiency. So to put your recommendations together, you're going to need to get an understanding around what are the daily activities that the key people are involved with, what are those processes that you need to get an understanding about. And this kind of analysis will also help to highlight to the C-suite, the ones that are going to sign off on your deal, if there are going to be any maybe bottlenecks or challenges from their team that's going to interfere with the organization being able to reach its desired revenue and growth goals. You could have the C-suite telling you one thing and believing in one thing, but then, you go talk to the people that are actually doing the work, the key stakeholders, the key workers, and how they're performing their job and how they're utilizing the technology. And that's going to help you readily identify what issues the team is going to have that's going to impact that ability for the organization to achieve its goals. So this part of the assessment is almost like providing that sanity check, I think, to the C-suite team to help them determine if the organization, as it stands today, could realistically even achieve its stated goals. And if you find out that they can't, by talking to the people that are actually doing the work, then this is where you get that information, you get that input, and you build recommendations around it, and you build it as part of your sales proposal. So looking at how do you conduct a workflow analysis. So just as a general overview, it really does start by interviewing the key stakeholders of the organization, identifying, what are their tasks, what are their activities, what are the processes that they're involved in to achieve whatever their outcomes or their deliverables or goals are. Because again, we want to identify gaps, right? That's the whole point of the assessment process. Identify gaps, identify inefficiencies, identify duplicate or redundant tasks, pain points, barriers, bottlenecks in their processes so that you can use all that information to identify opportunities for changes and make the necessary recommendations so that you can help make the prospect more operationally efficient, more productive. Because when an organization is more efficient and productive, that's what's going to help lower their operational costs, and it's going to improve their ability to generate more revenue more quickly. And that's what CEOs care about. That's what C-levels care about. And that's why this part of the assessment process is really important, because this is valuable data that you're going to be collecting, and it's what's going to really help set you apart and differentiate your MSP from whoever you're using today, and it's going to really cement you as that true business consultant, which is what we want to do. So in order to identify who the key stakeholders are that you need to speak with, again, we need to get a good understanding around, all of the active employees that are currently at work within the prospect's organization. So you're going to see, different screenshots now from that prospect assessment workbook, that Excel workbook that is available to everyone to download. So you're going to just, again, see these different screenshots, just to kind of outline, the type of information that you should be asking and collecting from your prospect at this stage. So obviously we want to find out how many active employees do they have, what's their position, what's their role within the company, what department are they a part of. You obviously want to find out if there's any technical people on staff. If you don't know this already, ideally you probably know if you're dealing with a business that has IT people in-house versus the traditional managed services client that would not have anybody in-house. See if they're able to provide you with any payroll information. Probably might, may not, but this is what's going to help you, if you can get that information, establish productivity and ROI when it comes to the preparation and the presentation of the sales proposal, and to really help answer any pricing objections that you may get from that prospect. If you're not able to get that type of payroll information, I don't want to say it's not a big deal, but ideally you probably have other customers that you're already dealing with already that's in the same industry as this customer that you're talking about today. So then you can just use generalities and use kind of some illustrative numbers then, based on your experience of working with other clients in the same industry. But if you can get this information, it would be very, very valuable. And then try to figure out, with the people that you're speaking with, do they have any direct reports that they manage? Obviously get their contact information if you need to get a hold of them. And then find out if they have people that are authorized to work remotely, either on a casual basis or a full-time basis, or even on a part-time basis. Because here what we want to do with this stage is really get an understanding of the org chart and find out who reports into who, so you can have that visual representation of how that organization is structured, so that you can understand, who are the key decision makers, who are the key stakeholders that you need and want to speak with. And then finding out, are they going on a hiring spree? Is there any new hiring initiatives that they might be planning, or maybe any potential layoffs that they might be considering? So you can see how those decisions are going to impact the overall workflow analysis. And then this is information that we are going to need anyway when we get into the cyber assessment process that we're going to be talking about in part 2. So looking at, the types of questions that, as you're sitting down with each of the key stakeholders, what do you want to be asking them? And this comes from a really good document that I found online. I put the reference there. It came from an Australian HR company. And because they talked about how they conduct their workflow analysis, and they were sharing some very valuable information online. So I put the I put the link there if you wanted to go check it out. But basically, you want to ask questions around their current role, around the duties within the company. You want to find out, who do they interact with, who do they supervise, who supervises them. You want to find out, what the working condition is like, what's the equipment, what are the systems, what are the tools, hardware, software that they're using to perform their job. What is their contribution to the overall strategic corporate goals? Do they even know what those goals are, and what their duties are that contribute to those goals? And then again, always make sure that we are capturing any relevant quotes from the employees that you're speaking with. That would be beneficial to include into your sales proposal, because we really want to make sure that we are documenting what's important to them on an individual basis and why it's important to them. And then, you may, out of all of this, for your sales proposal, create a workflow diagram, some sort of visual that you can use when you go to present your sales proposal, especially if you do uncover maybe some ineffective workflows with their processes that you might be able to improve for the prospect. And then obviously we do want to collect some information around their technology spending, around their IT budgeting processes, who are their current hardware and software vendors that they might be partnered with. And so some questions that you may want to ask in this section, and again, just another screenshot from the workbook, if we can find out what the prospect's annual revenues are, what's their operating budget like for the company, do they actually have an established budget with respect to IT? What percentage is that IT budget in comparison to their overall operating budget? And this is a good question to ask, because here you want to potentially highlight that if their operating budget is, I'm just throwing numbers out here, like 500,000, and their technology budget is only $10,000 of that, that means that their IT budget represents just 2% of their entire operating budget. And we know that that is entirely too low. And so expectations may have to be reset around how important it is to set a realistic budget for IT spending and for security services, especially given kind of the security threat landscape today. But other IT spending details that hopefully you're able to collect from your prospect, can they tell you how much they are currently spending on who they're using today for outsourced IT support services? Will they give you that monthly cost? Can they tell you how much they're currently spending on reactive end user help desk services or emergency services on a monthly or annual basis? Can they tell you how much they're spending on technology education and security awareness training? Critically important these days, so how much are they spending on that? Can they tell you how much they've spent on any capital improvement expenditures like servers, desktops, laptops, network devices, printers, that kind of thing? Can they tell you how much they're spending on equipment warranties, business application and software subscriptions, internet services, communication costs, that type of thing? And if possible, is this something that they can break down for you by department? You may or may not be able to get that information. Doesn't hurt to ask. And then can they provide you a list of, their current software and hardware technology vendors that they're under contract with? And then we want to gather kind of get a technical profile of the prospect's network, really get an understanding of, what the technology platforms are in place so that you can then really start thinking about, what's going to be the most effective solutions moving forward, given, maybe the technology platform that they're using today. And so this is where we do want to do an assessment of all of the different software business applications that are currently being used in the prospect's organization. So finding out if there's a software inventory, licensing inventory exists. If they're working with an MSP already, this should be something fairly easy that they give to you because their existing MSP should have this data. So trying to find out if this software inventory exists, when was the last time that it was verified for accuracy? Because as part of your executive review process that hopefully the MSP is doing, but if they're not, should be part of your executive business review, you should be every quarter or every 6 months, depending on the cadence of your QBRs, you should be verifying all of this for accuracy. So trying to find out, what are the operating systems that are in place on the desktops and the servers? Is there a desktop environment standard for applications? Are there any specific software applications that the organization has banned, like any games or file sharing? Looking at the software, is all software properly installed? Is it properly licensed? Is it accounted for? Looking at what are on-premise and cloud software applications are currently in use by the employees of the organization. Which department, which group, which position, what role relies on each piece of the software that you've been able to identify. Are the applications current and up to date in terms of the support contracts, their maintenance agreements, their updates. Who's expected to support these applications when there are issues? Does the prospect contact the vendor to resolve these issues? Do they prefer their MSP to act as the intermediary between themselves and the vendor? Which really way do they prefer to go? How critical is this piece of software to the employee's role? And I think this is a really important piece. Can you get them to provide a rating on a scale of 1 to 5, on how much they rely on that piece of software to perform that job? Can they tell you how long they could tolerate personally that application being unavailable, and if something happened and it went offline? Because again, if you are able to get that payroll information, and if you can get, how long they can tolerate being offline, that's going to help you determine what the downtime costs would be, on an hourly basis or on a daily basis, should that application become unavailable. And again, good information to include in our sales proposal. And then finding out, are there any business processes that maybe the current application doesn't address that maybe you wish it did? Are they looking at any new software as a result of this? And then obviously getting an understanding around, what software has maybe their existing MSP have installed already. Like, is there any antivirus or endpoint detection and response in place? Any password management software? What's the MSP stance on MFA? Is that enforced? Email security, threat monitoring and detection services, web content, backup, all of that. And then making sure that we're conducting a review of their overall network and hardware infrastructure. So again, this is probably stuff that you're very, very familiar with, but trying to see if a network diagram does exist, finding out how are the computers connected to one another. Again, does the organization authorize remote or work from home employees? Are the users complaining of any sort of network slowness during business hours? If there is growth being planned, so if they are moving offices, growing offices, and hiring employees, is there going to be enough speed, obviously, to accommodate that growth? Are there any known issues from either an operational or support standpoint regarding their network infrastructure? From a hardware standpoint, is there a hardware inventory list in play? There should be if they're using an MSP today. When was the last time that was verified for accuracy? Does an asset registry exist for the servers, for CPU and type and hardware drive and type and memory and that type of thing? Is there servers labeled with appropriate asset tags? And so obviously going around and doing kind of a walkabout to find this out. Is the hardware under any sort of warranty or maintenance program? And when do those maintenance agreements or warranties expire? And again, is there any new growth, any new projects being planned? Okay, so let's move on now into part 2, which I think is, probably just as critical as part 1, but probably a little bit more critical. This is where we're doing the cybersecurity and the data risk assessment process. For this particular section, we are going to be leveraging the CIS controls, and we're going to be using the CIS controls to create a checklist so that you can verify what that current MSP, whoever they're using today, is offering or doing for them. But hopefully it will help highlight maybe what their MSP is missing or what they're not doing, so that you can better understand where, again, those security gaps, those deficiencies, where they may deviate from your own MSP security standards. So again, as part of the assessment process workbook, I've included a checklist there to help you build out your own cybersecurity assessment checklist. I've also leveraged cyber liability insurance application forms, reviewed the questions on those forms, and I included those in the checklist as well, because I wanted to make it as comprehensive as possible. Because my thought process was, as I was building this last year, if cyber liability insurance companies are asking these types of questions of applicants, then you want to make sure that your assessment process and the security services that you are offering and delivering to your customers cover those bases as well. And so again, we want to use this to really highlight and differentiate your MSP from whoever they're using today, especially if you do find that there are some significant security deficiencies that you uncover, during your assessment process that might be putting this prospect at serious risk of being attacked or being breached and having their data stolen. And so this is your opportunity to really help your prospects see, hopefully acknowledge and understand all of their risks, because your job ultimately as the MSP is to protect them, is to protect their revenues, protect their employees, and to keep their business safe and secure and their employees as productive as possible. Because, and this is kind of something I always talk about in all of my boot camps, is you're not in the business of providing IT support. You don't fix computers anymore. You've moved beyond that. You need to redefine how you see yourself, because you are in fact risk mitigation specialists as part of a risk mitigation industry. So again, all of these questions that we're going to be asking in this next section, you can find it in the workbook that you can download. So as mentioned, we are going to leverage the CIS controls to help us develop our cybersecurity and data risk assessment process. We're using this to create kind of that standardized checklist as to what information should be collected when you're completing this part of the assessment. By incorporating the CIS controls into the assessment process, and really you can use any sort of cybersecurity framework for this. I just leverage the CIS controls because I think it's probably the easiest to understand. But they all kind of pretty much cover the same thing. But by incorporating the CIS controls into our assessment process, we were using this to help identify potential security risks that the prospect may be exposed to, that maybe their existing MSP hasn't identified, or maybe they don't know about because they're not as thorough as you are. And that's really what's going to allow you to demonstrate your security expertise, your authority. It's going to help differentiate yourself from who they're really using today, and hopefully create that sense of urgency within the sales process, because your proposal is then going to outline the different steps that you need to take to remediate those risks that you've uncovered at this stage of the sales process, and how you can help them really improve their security posture moving forward by partnering and working with you. If you've ever looked at the CIS control framework before, you know then how detailed it is. My goal of this part of the boot camp is to really kind of outline at more of a broader level what each CIS control states, and then highlight what are the most critical sections of that control that makes sense that we should be including in our assessment. So 20 controls, I think there's 160 different subpoints across each of these different controls. So I'm not going to be able to go through all 160 of them across all 20 controls, but my goal is really to provide kind of the top ones that you should be considering as part of your assessment process, especially if you've never done anything like this or to this extent. I'm also basing this on the CIS controls version 7.1. But I know for any of you spry ones out there listening to me today, yes, I know version 8 is out. It came out a couple of years ago. It's just a condensed version. I think they went from 20 controls down to 18, but we're still covering the same information. So for the intent of how I'm using it, it's still very relevant for today's bootcamp. Okay, so we're going to be getting into each of these controls now. And so the first two controls, number 1 and number 2, really involve compiling the information and getting that inventory of all of your hardware, all of your software assets at the prospect's location. Again, probably something we've already done because we just talked about it as part of the business and technology assessment review section. But these really are two critical pieces of the entire CIS control framework, because you do need to have an understanding of all of the hardware and all of the software assets that have to be monitored, managed, and protected within the prospect's environment, so that you can identify what are those unauthorized or unmanaged devices and unauthorized software applications that you need to be aware of, so then you can make the decision whether they need to remain or be removed. And so it's really about getting an understanding and an awareness around what's on that prospect's network and what shouldn't be on that prospect's network. Because when it comes to security and risk mitigation, you can't protect what you don't know about. And so being able to quickly identify unauthorized or unmanaged hardware assets, software, that's going to help prevent unwanted security breaches and help increase the productivity of the users. So, you know, what I'm listing here is kind of some of the main items, like the checklist highlights that we want to pull from each of the different CIS controls that we're going to be talking about. And then what I've done is really taken each of those and compiled it into kind of a checklist for you. Again, something to use. It's not pretty, I admit that, but it's really something that you can then use as a jumping off point to really make this your own, so that you can incorporate it into your own process. So now moving on to CIS control number 3. This is around secure configuration for hardware and software. There's 5 sections to this particular control, but at a high level, control number 3 is all about maintaining documented security configuration standards for all authorized operating systems and software. Organizations have to establish a baseline security configuration. They have to implement a configuration management and change control process, and they have to be able to actively be able to report on the security configuration of all the endpoint devices like mobile devices, laptops, servers, workstations, that type of thing. And this is another control that is specifically mentioned as part of the cyber liability insurance application form, because in the form, it specifically asks if the applicant rolls out hardened baseline configuration standards across all of the servers, laptops, desktops, managed mobile devices. Because, and you probably know this, as delivered by manufacturers and resellers, the default configurations for operating systems and applications, they're normally geared towards ease of deployment and ease of use, typically not focused on security. You know, in their default state, these types of systems can be easily exploitable. But by developing configuration settings with good security properties, this isn't something that a small business owner is typically capable of doing on their own. So this is where the oversight of an MSP is going to be very much needed. And even if strong initial configuration is developed and installed, you know that it has to be continually managed to avoid, you know, that security decay, right? Because if this doesn't happen, that's how attackers are going to find opportunities to get in and exploit both the network and the accessible services in the client software. So organizations are directed to develop and maintain strong, secure, baseline configurations for each software system, and they're directed to maintain documented security configuration standards for all the authorized operating systems and the software. And this is something you as their MSP will then need to take ownership of and manage for them to help reduce that risk exposure. Looking at CIS control number 4, this is where we're talking about continuous vulnerability management. There's 7 sections to this particular control, but at a high level, control number 4 is really all about developing a plan to continuously assess and track vulnerabilities and all enterprise assets within the infrastructure in order to help you remediate and minimize the window of opportunity for attackers. Also includes the monitoring of public and private industry sources for new threat and vulnerability information. And the focus of this control is really to ensure that your prospect has that established vulnerability management program in place and that it's configured to conduct regular comprehensive credential scans across the organization. And again, this is another question that is explicitly asked as part of a cyber liability insurance application form. And so the goal for you as their potential new MSP is, again, to identify the risks, the concerns that are currently present in the prospect's environment so that a proper onboarding and remediation plan can be included in your proposal document that outlines how you're going to correct what you've uncovered, and how you can put them in a safer position than what they are currently with their existing MSP, especially moving forward post-sale. Because MSPs that do not include regular vulnerability scans as part of their services, as part of maybe their advanced security package, to proactively uncover and address discovered flaws in their customers' networks, they're the ones that are putting their customers at a higher level of risk, because they are facing a significant likelihood of having their computer systems compromised. Looking at number 5, controlled use of administrative privileges. 9 sections as part of this control, but a high level, number 5 is all about reducing the risk of attack by being cognizant about who needs and who has to have access to administrative privileges and accounts, and tracking how those admin privileges and those accounts get used, because misuse of privileges is a primary method for attackers to spread inside an organization's network. Another control that is outlined and mentioned as part of a cyber liability insurance application form, and it actually comes up a couple of times in some of the forms that I've reviewed, because regular normal users of systems should never require admin privilege to do daily tasks. Like, does a business owner really need admin privileges? Probably not, because executives, they're the highest risk employees to an organization because of their inherent status, and they frequently are high value targets that are sought by attackers. So especially for these types of users, it is best to control and reduce their privilege and just save it for only those tasks that truly require that level of access. So what this control does is it gets your customers or your prospects to really think critically about who gets access to what, and ensuring that only those that truly do need that access get that access. And this is one control that can have probably one of the biggest impacts on reducing overall risk and preventing attacks within the organization. Looking at number 6, maintenance, monitoring, analysis of audit logs. There's 8 sections as part of this control, but at a high level. Number 6 is all about collecting, managing, analyzing audit logs of events that could help an organization detect, understand, or recover from an attack. Deficiencies in security logging and analysis, this is what allows attackers to hide their location, to hide malicious software, and conduct activities on victims' machines. So even if the victims know that their systems may have been compromised, without protected and completed logging records, you're basically going to be blind to the details of the attack and to any subsequent actions that have been taken by the attackers. Without solid audit logs, an attack, it can go unnoticed, maybe indefinitely. And the particular damages that might be as a result of that, they may be irreversible. So sometimes, in a lot of cases, the logging records are really the only evidence of a successful attack. Organizations keep audit logs for compliance purposes, but a lot of times the attackers are relying on the fact that organizations rarely look at those audit logs, and that because they're not really looking at them, they don't know that their systems have been compromised. And because of maybe poor or non-existent log analysis processes, attackers sometimes can control victims' machines for months, years, without anyone in the organization actually knowing, even though the evidence of the attack, it's there, it's been recorded, but it's in log files that aren't being regularly examined. So as a result of this high-level risk, organizations are directed to ensure that local logging has been enabled on all the systems, all the networking devices, and that those logs are reviewed on a regular basis. And again, this becomes something becomes a responsibility of you as the MSP through the implementation of your SIM tool, using some sort of managed detection response, your SOC, your SIM service that you should be incorporating and building into your advanced cybersecurity programs now. Looking at number 7, email and web browser protections. Another big section on a cyber liability insurance application form. There's 10 sections to this particular control, but a high level control number 7 really works to kind of minimize the attack surface and the opportunities for attackers to manipulate human behavior through the interaction of web browsers and email systems. Attackers do target email and web browsers with several different types of attacks. Some of the most popular and successful type of attacks are, the social engineering ones, right? Like phishing. Web browsers, email clients are very common points of entry for attack because of their direct interaction with end users and with other systems and websites. And unfortunately, there's certain features of email clients that can leave users vulnerable. Because content can be crafted to entice or spoof users, spoofed emails do pose a significant threat to organizations because they create that false sense of trust, right? End users end up taking actions that greatly increases their risk of allowing malicious code to be introduced into the environment, which then can result in a loss of valuable data and the possibility of maybe allowing other attacks to occur. And so as such, organizations are directed to ensure that only fully supported web browsers and email clients are to be used. And it's by allowing only fully supported, upgraded, and approved email clients and web browsers that organizations can mitigate this risks. So organizations are directed to use some sort of domain name system filtering services like DNS filtering services to assist in the identification and blocking of malicious domains. Looking at control number 8, malware defenses. There's 8 sections to this control at a high level. Number 8 is all around safeguards to prevent or control the installation, the spread, the execution of malicious applications, code, or scripts in enterprise assets. Malware, especially ransomware, it still remains a critical security issue, and it can be extremely destructive to an organization when they become a target of such an attack. Malicious software is designed to help attackers gain access and control over systems, over networks, because the intent is they're using it to steal sensitive data, capture user credentials, or even encrypt or destroy data. And besides ransomware, malware can also come in the form of Trojan horses, viruses, worms that can also be used to alter systems to allow an attacker to gain access. So to protect an organization from malware infections, this control really describes safeguards that should be implemented to help prevent these types of attacks. So you want to make sure that you have these specific services included as part of your advanced cybersecurity program, and that they are part of your sales proposal, especially if you discover that the existing MSP doesn't have safeguards like this in place currently at the prospect's location. Looking at number 9, this is where we're talking about limitation and control of network ports. 5 sections for this particular control, but a high level, number 9 really describes the safeguards that are needed to manage. And here we're talking about tracking, controlling, correcting. What are the ongoing operational use of ports, protocols, services on network devices in order to minimize the window of vulnerability that's available to the attackers. Because attackers, they're always searching for, they're always looking to try and exploit accessible and vulnerable network services. When we think about some common examples, we're thinking about, poorly configured web servers, mail servers, file print services, that type of thing. And a lot of software packages automatically install services and turn them on as part of the installation of the main software package. And they do this without really informing the user or the administrator that these services have been enabled. So attackers, they can scan for these services and they can attempt to exploit these services, and often attempting to exploit, default user IDs, passwords, or any widely available exploitation code. So because of this, basically any network, port, protocol running service, that really does increase the opportunity for the system to become compromised. So as an MSP, it is important that you are monitoring for open ports, because you want to make sure that only those ports, those protocols, those services that have a valid business requirement are open and running on each system. Because again, the more open and the more accessible you're making the system, the greater the attack surface is. And with new exploits really being discovered almost every day, anything that can reduce the potential for the attack, that's for the better. So monitoring for open ports, performing automated scans on a regular basis against all the systems, it's really critical to ensuring that unauthorized ports or services are detected and addressed accordingly. Moving on to CS control number 10, data recovery capability. 5 sections with this control. Another big part of a cyber liability insurance application form, but at a high level, number 10 really describes safeguards that are needed to ensure that the processes, the tools that are used to properly back up critical information, that they're in place within the organization, and that there's a proven methodology for timely recovery of the data, because it's no use backing up the data if you can't get the data back, and if you can't get the data back quickly and efficiently, because this is where you need to be able to have, or the MSP that they're dealing with should have good sound backup strategies in place to help the customer recover that lost data quickly and efficiently in the event of attack. And if you can identify that maybe that's not the case, this is another big area that you can win over and you can talk about as part of your sales proposal. And this is what's going to help create urgency in the sales proposal. And so you want to make sure also, as part of your own services that you take to market, that not only are you ensuring that the data is properly backed up, that it's archived, that you are implementing integrity testing on a regular basis, that there's at least one copy of their data that's backed up to the cloud, to an offline location, because all of this is going to be necessary in the event that there is an attack, and you have to now start quickly working to restoring the system, recovering the data, so that the business can get back up and running as quickly as possible. So looking at the last 10 CS controls and how we've built that into a cybersecurity assessment checklist for you, number 11 is all around securing secure configurations for network devices. And so here we're looking at things like firewalls, routers, switches, that type of thing. 7 sections to this particular control, but a high level, number 11, really focus on describing the safeguards that are needed to establish, implement, and actively manage. So again, tracking, reporting, correcting, the security configuration of network infrastructure devices using, a change management, change control process, in order to prevent attackers from exploiting vulnerable services and settings. And so again, the goal is to harden these critical network infrastructure devices against compromise, and to establish and maintain visibility into the changes that are occurring on them, whether those changes are made by legitimate administrators or maybe by an adversary. And just like back with control number 3, that talked about secure configurations for hardware and software, as delivered by manufacturers and resellers, the default configurations for network infrastructure devices like firewalls, routers, switches, they're geared more towards ease of deployment and ease of use, and not really security. And so again, attackers, they're searching for vulnerable default settings, gaps, inconsistencies in firewall rules, the routers, the switches, rule sets, and then they're working to exploit those flaws and use those holes to gain access into an organization's network, where they can then gain access to sensitive data, alter important data, redirect traffic on a network, and even use a compromised machine to pose as another trusted system on the network. Control number 12, boundary defense. There's 12 sections to this particular control, but a high level, number 12 really describes safeguards that are needed to ensure that the entry points into the network are clearly defined and monitored. So we're covering things like your DMZ, your firewalls, proxies, IDS, IPS, NetFlow, and remote access. When we look at boundary defense, it's typically that organization's first line of protection against outside threats. Attackers today, they are focused on trying to exploit systems that they can reach across the internet. So they're constantly probing perimeters for vulnerabilities and information that is required to help them succeed with that. So an organization's boundary defense strategy shouldn't just be about keeping the attackers out, but also keeping sensitive information in. And so the MSP must really work to identify, all the systems that access the organization's network from different locations. And they have to get an understanding of the boundaries of that network and determine how access should be controlled and what protocols are allowed so that any communication over unauthorized TCP or UDP ports or application traffic is denied. Because network boundaries in today's environment, they no longer have a clear edge, unfortunately, and they no longer are defined as kind of a single ingress point protected by a firewall and edge routers like we were used to in the past. Today, the network perimeter, it extends well beyond, kind of this gateway, right, into the organization. It encompasses the cloud, when we're talking about AWS and Azure or other services and VPN endpoints. And we have more and more users working from home these days, especially post-COVID. And so by verifying, what the existing MSP is doing currently to strengthen an organization's perimeter and policing traffic, that's kind of allowing the traffic that's flowing into and out of the network, that's really going to help you determine what additional measures may have to be implemented to mitigate any risk associated with the edge. So that's why, as part of the business assessment and the workflow, finding out, where are the employees working? Are they working in the corporate office behind a corporate firewall, or are they like most organizations these days that are very fluid, where the employees are traveling, they're working from their cottage, they're working from home, they're working from a Starbucks? We need to know that information. Looking at control number 13, back to data protection. There's 9 sections to this particular control, but at a high level, number 13 really describes the safeguards that are needed to ensure that all the data is classified and protected in accordance with established data classifications. So this is just basically focusing on secure data management and implementing the proper controls that are needed to prevent data from leaving your prospect's environment in an unstructured or unauthorized way. These days, data is residing in a lot of different places. So it is important to help your prospects really understand what kind of data do they have, why is it important to them, because you need this information as their MSP so that you can then classify it appropriately and then build a plan around what needs to be done to secure and protect, each data classification set. Because if you don't know what kind of data they have, and if you don't understand how critical it is to the organization, then really how can you secure and protect it correctly? So here we're looking to see if there is some sort of data protection plan, some sort of data inventory document, some sort of data classification policy that has been implemented that clearly outlines, what kind of data is being stored on their network, and more importantly, where is that data being stored? And if their existing MSP hasn't done this for them, then this is your opportunity to really explain how critically important this is from a business risk mitigation standpoint, and that this is something that you do include as part of your services. Again, it's another way that you can really demonstrate your security first mindset and your security expertise, from maybe who they're using today that maybe doesn't have that knowledge or that security first mindset. Data protection is critically important because in a lot of cases, it's either the law that your prospect protects, certain pieces of data, or they might have some kind of regulatory obligations like HIPAA or PCI, where you have to make good faith efforts to protect that critical data. These days, compliancy, especially if you're dealing with organizations that fall under healthcare, banking, PCI, compliancy isn't an option. Those customers that are in those and residing in those industries, they don't have a choice of whether they need to be compliant or not. And this is part of compliancy. And so it's definitely one of those things that you want to highlight, because especially if their existing MSP isn't doing this today, this is something that you can build into your sales proposal as part of your overall services to help them with adhering to improving their compliance. So looking at control number 14, controlled access based on the need to know. 9 sections as part of this control, but at a high level, number 14 really describes the safeguards that are needed to ensure that users are only allowed to access the information that they are authorized for or that they need to use as part of their job duties. It focuses on ensuring that your prospects' networks, that they're kind of segmented based on the criticality of the data that the organization is collecting, and restricting access to that data based, again, on actual business need. Because the goal is to reduce the ability for an attacker to communicate to other devices on maybe the same subnet of a compromised system. So you want to make it as difficult as possible for attackers to get access to every system within your prospect's environment. Also, as part of this control, you want to make sure that the access control lists are audited regularly, because just what was established 3, 6, 9 months ago doesn't necessarily mean that the prospect's organization has remained static during that same time period. We know that users come and go, users change roles, within the company all the time. So as the MSP, you should be conducting regular reviews, with the senior executive team, so that you can determine, what personnel changes have been made within the company, so you can keep the access control list updated and correct. And this is something that, I talk about as part of my QBR process that every MSP should be following on a, every quarter or 6-month basis. Looking at control number 15, wireless access control. 10 sections to this particular control, but a high level, number 15, really describes the safeguards that are needed to ensure that wireless access is configured properly to kind of track and control that access, because we want to prevent unauthorized access. And if misconfigurations are found, obviously those settings need to be corrected. So here we're looking specifically at the security use of wireless tools, looking at the wireless local area networks, we're looking at the access points, we're looking at wireless client systems. And this is important because we know how wireless access accounts and wireless access, it's so commonplace these days, right? It's just a natural part of a major organization's network infrastructure these days. Your prospect's workforce likely relies on wireless for its convenience and flexibility, having that ability to be mobile, both in the office and on the go. Like, I know whenever I go into one of Enable's collaboration hubs, it is just so convenient just to kind of unplug my laptop if I'm working at a desk and then I have to go into a meeting room, or if I have to go into somebody's office. Like, it's you don't even think about it these days. It's just wireless is just a necessary form of efficient workflow. And so while wireless communication and wireless access is beneficial, it does expose the networks to an array of problems related to network boundaries. So this is where you want to be able to verify how well is the existing MSP doing at really managing the prospect's Wi-Fi. And the protection of this critical component, it should be part of any mature security plan, because it is necessary to know who's connected into the network, where are they connecting from, and as their MSP, you should and you can help monitor and assist with this. Looking at control number 16, account monitoring and control. 13 sections to this particular control, but at a high level, control number 16 really describes the safeguards that are needed to ensure that all accounts are managed in a fashion that promotes clean account hygiene, because it is through misuse or neglect of account maintenance that can really lead to potential system compromise. This control, there is a strong connection to control number 5, which does speak to elevated privileges. But control 16 really looks at, all the accounts and how local computer and application policy specifically can be configured to support good account hygiene. So looking at things like, does the prospect MSP, are they diligent about deactivating the accounts, everywhere for past employees, in the event that they've maybe resigned and moved on, or maybe the employee has been terminated. And so this is really about controlling what accounts live and die and when they live and die, basic account lifecycle management. It's having that good understanding of what kind of accounts are in use, what accounts are still legitimately active, and which ones are no longer valid or in use. Because accounts of contractors, employees that have been terminated but maybe not yet deleted from the system, they have the strong potential of being misused. Attackers are looking and trying to find and exploit legitimate but inactive user accounts so they can impersonate them and gain access into the system. Additionally, if there is no official offboarding policy in place for when someone leaves an organization, malicious insiders or former employees, they're still able to gain access to those accounts that are left behind in the system long after they have left the company. And this is allowing them to kind of maintain access to the organization's computing system, their sensitive data, again, for potentially unauthorized or malicious purposes. It also looks at whether the MSP enforces the use of 2FA for all the accounts, because two-factor is one of the most effective controls that an MSP can implement to protect the organization's network, because obviously the goal with two-factor is to make unauthorized network attempts as difficult as possible, because it then forces the attackers to then maybe move on to other targets. It's all about, putting as many layers in as possible to make it as difficult as possible for the bad guys to get in. Build that wall up really, really high that the attacker realizes, oh, this isn't worth my time. I'm going to go look at other organizations that haven't built a wall as high or as strong as the one that this MSP has built around their customers. Looking at control number 17, implementing a security awareness and training program. Very important these days. 9 sections as part of this control, but a high level 17 is all around the importance of implementing a security awareness program within every organization you support. Obviously, what that looks like is going to vary depending on the size and maturity of the organization that you're talking to. But it's important because it is tempting to think that cyber defense is primarily a technical challenge, but the actions of people also play a very critical part in the success or failure of an organization preventing or succumbing to an attack. Stats vary depending on the report that you read, but I've read stats from different reports that it's anywhere from 37% to almost 90%. I think it was 87% of the time a security breach is the result of an employee clicking on something that they shouldn't have clicked on. So implementing a comprehensive security program, but if you fail to include security training for your customers' employees as part of your program, I feel that that's a real oversight, and that's what number 17 is trying to correct. So the key message behind this control is that it does speak about implementing a security awareness program that really serves to instruct employees on best practices, current defense strategies, and really what is expected from them, because cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. It's not all on you, it's not all on the tools. The customer and their employees play a role as well in helping to mitigate that risk. And if you happen to have listened to another boot camp that I delivered on finding opportunities in a saturated market, I think I delivered that one 2 months ago. That marketing boot camp focused on ways that MSPs can differentiate themselves where you're not relying on the word MSP, managed services, or calling yourself an MSP that delivers managed services. Again, you would have heard me talk about that those are industry terms. They're not necessarily terms that the average non-technical business owner would know. So to set yourself apart from all the other MSPs that you might be competing against in your area, you want to really look at, what are other ways that you can use to describe yourself? What are other ways that you can promote yourself that doesn't rely on you saying you're an MSP that delivers managed services? And one of those is you can position your MSP as that security trainer. It could be one of those ways where you really do help to set yourself apart from other MSPs in your area and to make you feel or to help your MSP appear different from your competition. Again, putting yourself as that security focused or that security minded service provider, and your cybersecurity awareness training can be that way to get yourself in the door at that prospect site, to allow you to do that assessment. And then when you hopefully sign them on and you implement your program, you have that cybersecurity awareness training program already built in, and your managed services rides the coattails of that. Looking at control number 18, application software security, 11 sections as part of this control, but a high level, control 18 really talks about the importance of managing the security lifecycle of all in-house developed and acquired software in order to prevent, detect, and correct security weaknesses. Vulnerabilities can be present for any number of reasons. There could be coding mistakes, there could be logic errors, there could be incomplete requirements, there could be the failure to test for unusual or unexpected conditions. And bad actors are trying to take advantage of these types of vulnerabilities that can be found in web-based or other application software, and they can be used and weaponized to exploit those vulnerabilities. So with this control, we're looking at things like, does the prospect's MSP monitor to ensure that all versions of third-party software that are being used within the environment, are they still being supported by the vendor, or are they out of support? Are they, end of life? And again, another question that does appear on the cyber liability insurance application form, it does ask if there's any end of life or end of support software that's currently residing on the network and being supported. Because if there is, that is what can introduce a potential vulnerability and a breach risk into the organization. And so you also want to find out, does the prospect's MSP, how up to date are they in making sure that all the software gets patched and up to date, especially third-party software. And so this is where scans should be completed on a very regular basis to try and uncover these application vulnerabilities so that they can quickly be patched and corrected. Number 19, incident response and management. There's 8 sections to this particular control, but at a high level, number 19 is really talking about the importance of establishing a program to develop and maintain an incident response capability. So making sure that there's the policies, there's the plans, the procedures, who's doing what, so you're defining the different roles, that you're testing it, that you're training it, that you have the proper communications in place so that you can help prepare, detect, and quickly respond when an attack occurs. So it really covers 2 critical items. Does the prospect's MSP today that they're using have an incident management plan in place? Has it been communicated to the prospect so they know what to do when the user detects something abnormal? So if the user feels that something's not right and they call into the MSP and says, yeah, something's not right, does the MSP have that established plan of what the response is supposed to be? Because if your prospect does suffer a data breach or a phishing attack, ransomware or DDoS attack, does the MSP know how they are going to respond? Is there a process in place in that? Because a mature, security conscious MSP like yourself that offers and support a quality security program, they will have a documented incident response management program in place for their MSP and for their customers. Because again, as the MSP, your goal is to protect your customers' information and protect their reputation. And this is accomplished by developing and implementing an incident response infrastructure plan that's going to allow you to quickly uncover an attack, help you contain the damage of the attack, by doing what you can to eradicate the attacker's presence as quickly as possible, and then assisting the customer with being able to restore the integrity of their network, their systems, and their data as quickly as possible. Because when a cyber incident occurs, and they're just a fact of life these days, if there is no documented incident response plan in place with that existing MSP, it's going to be too late for their existing MSP to try and develop one on the fly. It's something that can't be winged or developed in the moment, because without an incident response plan in place, the MSP themselves may not even discover or recognize that there's an attack in the first place. Or if the attack is detected, the MSP and the customer may not be following the right set of procedures or the right set of best practices that are needed to contain the damage, eradicate the attacker's presence, and then recover in a secure and efficient fashion. So as a result, the attacker may succeed in having a far greater impact, causing more damage, infecting more systems, and potentially exfiltrating more sensitive data than they otherwise would have been possible if there had been an effective incident response plan in place. So this is something that you do want to ask as part of your assessment process, because again, another what I feel big true differentiator between those MSPs that do take that security first mindset, risk mitigation, cyber resiliency seriously for their customers versus those that don't. And it just can't be words that they put into their marketing material to sound like they do. You want to be able to see if there's actual evidence in place and then use that, weaponize that against them. And then a final testament to a good security program, number 20 does recommend, and this is the number 20 is more of a higher level, but number 20 does recommend that the organization test all of the security controls that are in place to determine the overall strength of an organization's defense, the technology, the processes, the people, and they do this by simulating the actions and objectives of an attacker. And one approach to accomplish this is to conduct pen testing. Pen testing exercises. And that's really kind of the intentional launch of cyber attacks in order to evaluate an organization's overall security posture. There's 8 components to this control, but there's really just one key item that I want to pull from it to add to the assessment checklist. And that is, does the prospect's MSP perform any sort of periodic pen testing on their network as part of their overall risk mitigation strategy? Does the prospect's MSP use expert pen testers or, any sort of ethical hackers to conduct pen tests in order to try and break into the network to highlight the blind spots, on their websites, on their applications, et cetera, within the network? Because it is by identifying these types of vulnerabilities that you are then able to build a plan, help the business stay on top of their security management, and build up their own internal security awareness. This is different from vulnerability testing, which was control number 4. Vulnerability testing uses non-intrusive scanning to identify weak points in a system's security in that attempt to uncover security breaches, but is not designed to exploit them. In contrast, pen testing uses intrusive methods to really test how damaging a cyber attack could be for an organization. It works to imitate a real attack to discover exactly, what IT assets an attacker could access. So it is kind of a higher end feature that may or may not be part of your advanced security program. It could be kind of an advanced plus feature that you build in. But using vulnerability and pen testing together, that can produce a comprehensive view of all of the security deficiencies and help bring this information to the forefront of a security conversation when you are working with prospects, especially if you find out or you get the feeling that their existing MSP isn't doing anything like this, from a security perspective. So it can be an expensive activity to undertake, but external and internal pen tests can reveal really vital weaknesses in the prospect's IT systems that you can then use to really highlight, build it into your sales proposal, to kind of convey how vulnerable their data and other assets are to breaches or being compromised. And it can really work to help, again, create that sense of urgency within your sales process and really help motivate that prospect to really consider switching over to you and paying more and leaving their other MSP behind. Right? So we just spent the first, little bit going through, what questions to ask in the different sections, how they map, to the CIS controls, how they map to the different cyber liability insurance applications forms. So we've collected a lot of raw data at this point from the customers network and from the key stakeholders that we've been speaking to. This last part of the boot camp, I want to focus on a methodology on what to do with this data, how to analyze it so that you can then put it into the next stage, take that information, build your results, build your recommendations, and put it into your sales proposal. So there's 6 steps to the methodology. We're going to review how we can take that raw data and utilize it in each of these 6 steps. So we're breaking each of these steps down. We're going to incorporate it, how that raw data can be used. Again, screenshots that we're going to be showing here, all part of that Excel workbook that you're able to download. But the first step is trying to determine, what's the scope of the assessment. If possible, the goal is to include all the devices, all the end users into your assessment, but that may not be feasible or realistic. Really depends on the size of the prospect that you are speaking with. If they have multiple offices, if they have different departments. So you're gonna, sake of time, you're gonna have to choose, what are the most business critical assets or the most critical business departments and key stakeholders, and build the scope of the assessment just based on that subset. So this is where you do want to find out who are the key stakeholders, what are their role, what are they considered to be their most business critical assets and departments. Again, you probably already have this information because we talked about it in stage 1, but it's just a reminder that if we didn't get that information, we have to get that information. Step 2 is where we are performing that data audit, so we can gain an understanding as the type of data that your prospect collects and determine the value of that data to the organization. And so this is, again, based on CIS control number 10 and CIS control number 13, data recovery and the data protection. So this step actually stems from those 2 controls. And so before starting your audit, you do need to determine and define, what's your standard going to be, right? Like, how are you going to rate or how are you going to classify the importance of a particular asset? And I think an easy way to classify an asset is to base it upon the importance of that asset to the overall business. And so to do this, we need to ask a few discovery questions. And so finding out, what type of data does the organization collect? Are they collecting financial data? So there's going to be banking information, account numbers, that type of thing from their customers. Are they collecting customer data like PII information, like email addresses, phone numbers, date of birth? Are they collecting intellectual property data like coding information? Is there special projects or services, patents, copyrights, trade secrets? All that confidential business information that would be considered intellectual property, which is a different data classification. And then trying to determine, what assets within the organization are each of these different pieces of data found on, who has access to this data, both internally and externally, how valuable is this information to a competitor, should the competitor be able to get their hands on it. So this is where we want to start giving a rating here of high, medium, or low in terms of the overall valuableness of the data. Would the C-level suite be able to recreate this information from scratch should they lost it? And then if they say, yeah, no problem, then find out, well, how long would that take you then if you needed to recreate this lost data? And then what would the cost associated with recreating that data be to your organization? And then how would losing this information impact the day-to-day operations of you and your team? And, you know, here we're looking to see, like, could your staff continue to work without this data if it was lost? And so again, this is where we want to get another impact rating, where we want to find out high, medium, or low in terms of if your employees lost the data, you know, would they still be able to work? And then what would losing this information have on the revenue or profitability for your organization? Would it have a high impact, a medium impact, or a low impact? You know, if this data got lost, yeah, we could still function and we're not going to lose any money or any sleep over it. Then I would say that would be low impact. And then based on that, oops. And then based on how that prospect really answers the questions, you then would get them to classify each of the assets then. And you would either classify it as maybe a critical asset, as maybe a major asset, or a minor asset. Meaning that if important financial data is found on the CFO's computer and that data was lost and the revenue impact would be high, I would say that that asset classification rating for that CFO's desktop, that would be critical. And then in the spreadsheet, to help highlight it, you know, you may want to color code it, you know, red for critical, orange for major, yellow for minor, to make it a little bit more visual to your prospect, especially if you don't have any tools. And again, keep in mind, this is very thorough because we're doing this all manually. I'm assuming that you don't have a tool, so you kind of want to take this information and make it visually appealing to your prospect to really help them understand the criticality of this. And you know, obviously we want to get our prospects' opinion on this. We want to get them to advise us on what assets they believe are vulnerable and valuable to their role and to the organization. But you also need to step back and remember, you're the expert here, right? So you need to give this activity considerable thought as well, and not necessarily take them at their word, because you know, they may not fully understand the importance and the role that each asset plays in the organization. You know, if an asset is important to the overall workflow of the organization, I would consider that a critical asset, and it would be important to the company, even if the prospect doesn't believe it to be so. You know, maybe they tell you, yeah, there's some data on this, but it's not that big of a deal. We consider this a minor asset. But again, you're dealing with non-technical people here, right? So if you know in your mind, no, you're a little bit wrong there, don't be afraid to override them and correct them based on your own expertise. Then what you need to do is identify all of the risks that could potentially impact the prospect. And for this risk identification step, there's 3 parts that you're going to want to complete to identify the security risk and the potential threats. With the first task being, you need to identify, again, those valuable assets that could fall victim to being attacked or could succumb to risk. And this comes directly from CIS control number 1 and 2, where you need to make sure you have your hardware and your software inventory. You need to know of all the assets that are connected into the infrastructure, physically, virtually, remotely, and those within the cloud environment, as well as all the software applications like your operating systems and other types of applications that can be found on the system. Also comes from your data audit that we just completed in the previous step, where you identified with the client, you know, the most critical assets that's storing the company's most confidential and valuable data. And it's also what we uncovered in the business review and technology assessment from part 1. Because again, going back to that notion that we can't protect what we don't know about. So you need to work with all the key stakeholders to review the software list, the asset inventory list, and the network architecture that hopefully you can generate, so that you can identify those assets that the prospect would consider to be really they're crown jewels, right? You know, those assets that are critical to the business and therefore would be a primary target for attackers. So you can see that I have another screenshot of the spreadsheet that I created to help you collect this information. I actually have two versions of this chart to consider the two different asset types that you're going to be assessing. The software applications that the key stakeholders are relying on, as well as the hardware assets that the organization relies on. And then for each asset, making sure that we're gathering, you know, what's the purpose of the asset, why it's important, how critical is the asset to the functioning of the organization. This is where we're giving it a rating of high, medium, and low. How is that asset used on a day-to-day basis? Are there any security policies in place, or are there any security controls in place around this asset to protect it from being attacked or getting breached? You know, how does it fit into the overall prospects network? And are there any technical security controls or physical security controls in place as well? And then the second task as part of step 3 is we want to identify the potential threats, you know, cyber or otherwise. You know, and the way we define threats is threats are really any vulnerability, any tactic, any technique, any method used by threat actors that could be exploited to breach security, that has the potential to cause harm or steal data from an organization. And, you know, while hackers, malware, other IT security risks typically come to mind, there are other threats that you're going to want to consider when you're performing your assessment. So we want to look at things like natural disasters, network or system failures, you know, user or human error. You know, as I mentioned, you know, upwards of almost 90% of breaches, according to some reports, it's the result of some type of human error. So, you know, this is where does the existing MSP conduct proper education and training around malware, phishing, social engineering? Are they educated around the importance of regular backups and strong password management? And this all comes directly from CIS control number 17, where it does discuss, if you recall, the importance of implementing and conducting security awareness training within every organization. We're talking about unauthorized access from attackers, misuse of information by authorized users, data leaks, loss of data, service disruption, software, coding vulnerabilities. So these are all other different threats that have to be considered. And so again, showing another screenshot from the workbook, but I have added a new column. I've labeled it 3B. And I've labeled it identify potential threats, where you would then input the potential threat information that you could have from each asset. Then you kind of want to outline for the prospect in the proposal what could go wrong. You know, once you've identified the threats that are facing your prospect's organization, we now need to assess the impact of those threats. And so this task involves really specifying the consequences of an identified threat exploiting a vulnerability of an in-scope asset. So you can see here that I've expanded on the spreadsheet again to include some additional columns to highlight vulnerabilities and potential consequences. So as an example here, you know, say the potential threat is there's an attacker that performs an SQL injection on a unpatched web server. You know, that's the vulnerability, that's the asset, and the consequence is they're trying to steal the customer's private data. So summarizing this information in a simple scenario like this, again, what we're trying to do is make it easier for all the stakeholders to understand the risks that they were facing in relation to the key business objectives and to communicate these risks at the proposal stage within your recommendations and best practices, and to hopefully highlight that, again, this is something that their existing MSP is not taking care of or even thinking about today. Then you need to move into the risk analysis step, and this is where we really want to analyze those identified risks to determine the potential impact on the organization's business. And so this is where we want to really move from what could happen to what has the chance of actually happening. And so this is where we want to determine, you know, the likelihood of those different risk scenarios and the potential threats that were documented in the previous step. what are the chances of them actually occurring and the impact if it did occur. And in a cybersecurity risk assessment like we're talking about today, this is really defined as the risk likelihood. So it's the probability that a given threat is capable of exploiting a given vulnerability. And so when we're ranking risk likelihood, we're doing on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is rare, it's the risk likelihood is it's not really going to happen, versus number 5, where it has a really good chance of happening. And then we want to do the same for the breach impact. We want to rate the breach impact on a scale of 1 to 5. And when we think about the breach impact, and if we're trying to define it, this is where we're referring to really the magnitude of harm to the organization resulting from the consequences of a threat vulnerability being exploited. And so this is where, again, we use a rating of 1, where the breach impact would be minimal, negligible, up to 5, where it would be severe. Like it could potentially be an extinction event if this breach actually occurred because of a vulnerability actually being exploited. And so again, the idea here is we're trying to, without the use of tools, try to quantify the various risks, the various threats that have been identified, and come up with a scoring system as to how susceptible the prospect's hardware, the software is to certain type of attacks. Again, especially if their existing MSP isn't doing anything like this today. And so I've added a couple of columns to the spreadsheet so that you can add in the risk likelihood and also add in the breach impact and put in that rating of 1 to 5. And then lastly, step 5 is all about evaluating the levels of risk. And you'll see that I've included a risk matrix here. This is basically taking all of the information that we've collected so far for each asset, the ratings that we've assigned to each asset in terms of risk likelihood and the breach impact, and then grading that risk that's inherent to that asset on a scale. And that scale is low to very high. So I've just included what you're seeing here is a screenshot of a sample risk matrix that you can refer to. This also is part of the assessment workbook. And in this matrix, the risk level equation that we're using is risk likelihood multiplied by the breach impact. And using this risk matrix like this, hopefully, again, without the use of tools, makes it easier for the prospect to understand the severity of the risk that their organization is currently exposed to, which will then help you and allow you to propose and recommend your different risk mitigation strategies or techniques to address these different risk elements that you've identified as a result of doing this overall cyber risk assessment. And so the idea here is that you would run each risk scenario that was identified in step 3 through this matrix so that you can assign an individual risk level to each risk scenario. So as an example, going back to our risk of a SQL injection attack, that would be considered, hold on, how come my things aren't working. Okay, I had a whole bunch of animation going on in here. It's not really working. But example, if we have a SQL breach attack, which would be considered maybe kind of a severe, oh, there it goes, a severe attack in terms of a breach impact, it would be considered likely or very likely to occur. Then the risk rating for the SQL Server asset, we will classify it as being high or very high. So that's kind of how that risk matrix works. And so the idea with this risk matrix is, again, provide you, your prospect, with that visual scoring system to really help you quantify and qualify the risk for them. Because quantifying risk to a non-technical business owner, it can potentially be a very difficult thing to do. And so the idea here is it makes it a little bit easier for everyone to see and to interpret. And so you can see I've just added that additional column to the spreadsheet. So you can add that in for each in-scope asset as you're running through each breach scenario. And then there's, kind of 4 ways next of addressing how you can potentially deal with each risk scenario that you've identified. And your remediation or your mitigation strategies, it's really going to depend on how much that asset is worth, or how or what that asset is worth to the organization. Because if it ends up costing more to protect that asset than what the asset is actually worth, really doesn't make any sense to use any sort of preventative controls to protect it. So the 4 options that you have is, we have avoid. So if the risk outweighs the benefits, we want to discontinue that activity, as that may be the best course of action. If it means that, you know, we're no longer being exposed to it. We could transfer or share a portion of that risk to other parties, and this is done through maybe cyber insurance, outsourcing certain operations to maybe third parties, so the risk isn't all on you. We're sharing the risk. We could mitigate it. In this way, we could deploy maybe a new security control, a new tool set, other measures to kind of reduce the likelihood or the impact, and therefore the breach impact. Or we can just accept that risk, you know, depending again on the asset's importance to the company, depending on budget. They, you know, the prospect may flat out decide, you know what, I'm okay with accepting the risk. We will assume that risk, even though we do see that there is some risk being posed to our environment. And if this is the case, and if you're going to allow this, then you're going to want to make sure that you do have the proper documentation in place to have that client sign off on, so that they do understand the risk that they're taking on, and they're choosing to accept that risk should anything happen, and they cannot come back and blame you and your MSP. So again, just added in another column to the spreadsheet, so you can put in kind of what your evaluation recommendation would be, and then this gets moved over into your proposal. And then the final step is then to document all of these risks that you've identified and to create a risk assessment report. This would get included into your assessment report, also gets probably built into your sales proposal, and you would use this to create your remediation plan that you would then begin implementing once the prospect decides to hopefully sign with you. And so should you win this client, this risk assessment report then becomes part of your tech roadmap moving forward. And that is your living, breathing document that you're going to be able to refer to on that regular basis as part of your onboarding activities and as part of your regular quarterly business review or semi-annual review that you have with your client. So this is an important document because you're going to be referring to this quite often, so that you and your client are being kept up aware and appraised of all of the outstanding cyber risks that your customer is still exposed to that need to be addressed, either through projects or that kind of work. And this way, should something happen, by having this all documented and continually discussing this in an open and honest conversation with your client, this is what is also going to help limit your liability, and it's going to take the emotion out of a potential breach event if it happens. Because in this case, the client is the one that's being blamed here, because they're in charge of the purse strings, right? And they decided not to adhere to your recommendation. They decided not to make the additional investments that would have mitigated these outstanding risks. They brought this on themselves, and this is by no fault of you. What you've done is you've done the work, you've done the evaluation, you've done the analysis, you've brought to them their risks, you gave them the plan. You can lead the horse to water, but you cannot make them drink. And that's really what you're doing here to protect yourself. So this is what's known as a risk register. And again, I have a sample in the workbook. And so when you're creating your risk register, you want to make sure that you're documenting each threat, each risk scenario, you're outlining the vulnerability, you're outlining the likelihood of it occurring, you're identifying when you identified it, you're putting in the current risk level in terms from that risk matrix. Is this a high risk, very high risk, medium, low risk? You're documenting what are the existing security controls that are in place today. Probably a lot of cases, maybe none. You're putting in what your treatment plan is, what your recommendations are, the status, you know, whether it's not started, in progress, or still needs to be, or maybe it's completed. This is something, again, that you talk about at each review that you have moving forward. And then the risk owner, like, is it going to be you? Is it going to be the client? Is it going to be a couple of different people at the client site that are going to be responsible in owning that risk? Okay. So then once you've collected that data, I wanted to provide a sample report format so that you can use this. If you don't have this today, you have a format that you can use when speaking to your prospect. And so within the handout section, there is a sample report that you can download, that you can use, that you can customize to help you deliver your assessment findings and your recommendations to your prospect. And again, this is all in the assessment workbook and downloadable. You'll notice that this is a very business-oriented report, focusing on what's important to business owners and what they value. I've seen a lot of different reports, and I appreciate all the different MSPs that helped me put this bootcamp together. But a lot of the reports that they sent me, they were very technical. You know, they had hardware inventories in them, software inventories. They had all this metrics and technical information in them. But that isn't what your business owner prospect cares about or wants to see. You need to collect all that information so that you can do your assessment. But your business owner prospect, they only really care about the findings, and they really only care about your recommendations. And that's what this report that I provided everyone really focuses on, because your business owner, they only really care about what issues did you find that maybe their existing MSP missed, or maybe they're not doing. How critical is that issue? What needs to be done to fix it? And what would the consequences be if it went unactioned? And so when it's laid out in this format, this is what's really going to, again, create that sense of urgency that we want within our sales process and motivate the prospect to sign with us. Okay. Now, for all of you that have stuck by me for these last couple of hours, I really appreciate it. And, you know, maybe the thought came in your mind like, Steph, this is too much. This is really extensive. Why do I need to bother going through this level of detail and trouble for a prospect? Like I said in the beginning, if you haven't done anything like this before, if you're lacking a structured process like this, I'm not going to lie, this does seem like a lot of work, but only in the beginning. You know, as you keep with it, as you tweak it, as you make it your own, you will get comfortable with the process, and it won't take as long, especially once you kind of understand what the manual process is. You start introducing data collection tool sets to help you with the data collection and the analysis, all of that. But even though this is a prospect, the benefit of doing something like this are significant, with the biggest benefit being, should you win the prospect and they decide to become a client, then this data that you're collecting in this phase of the sales process, this is what's going to give you the justification, the rationale that is needed to charge maybe an upfront project if one needs to be done at the beginning of the client engagement, because maybe there's some issues that have to be remediated quickly and prior to the actual start of the managed services contract. Because through the risk identification analysis, you know, hopefully you have uncovered issues that have to be remediated, that were missed, and they have to be remediated sooner rather than later. So by turning these action items into an upfront project, not only are you making some quick revenue at the outset, but you're also working to reduce the risk window for both you and your customer, because your goal is to get these risk issues, these concerns, resolved as quickly as possible, you know, right at the beginning of the client engagement, instead of just making it part of the package and working through the issues, you know, that way through the natural course of the managed services agreement. You know, your goal to reduce your risk is to bring that network up to an acceptable, safer level of risk prior to you starting your managed services monthly contract. And so conducting an assessment like this and completing an upfront project like this is going to help create that appropriate, safer baseline moving forward. And if we can reduce the risk window by implementing that upfront project right at the beginning, that's going to help us reduce the risk exposure, not only for your customer, but for your MSP as well. Because once you sign them on as a client, you are now inheriting a lot of that risk and being responsible for the majority of that risk. And having collected all of this data, again, that's what creates that sense of urgency in your sales process, which is what we want. We don't want our deal to stall or to close. You know, we want to be able to bring this client in, close them, onboard them, and move them on. And you can do that in a lot quicker format if you leverage an assessment to this capabilities versus if you didn't have an assessment at all. And again, it is going to be helpful in demonstrating ROI for the next and final stage of the sales process, because you're going to need a lot of information to help justify the fee that you are charging and trying to defend and explain why you charge what you do. So the importance of going through the CIS controls, using them to map to your cybersecurity risk assessment process, really, really important, because you can't defend what you don't know about. And so the CIS controls, or really any cyber security framework, it offers a great foundation so you can get that good, full understanding of what that prospect's network look like, so you know what they have, you know what the state it's in, you know what the MSP that they're using today is and is not doing, so you can put in a place to monitor, remediate, and correct. And if you don't follow these steps for every new prospect engagement, then there's the potential where you could be blind as to the risk that your prospect may possess. And that's not a good situation for you to be in as their potential new MSP. So to bring everything full circle, to wrap things up, at the heart of it, vulnerabilities exist in your prospect's network. They're always there. It just takes someone to find them. And that's why it is important to conduct a comprehensive assessment like this as part of your pre-sales process, so you can find and identify those vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. Because by doing so, this is what's going to help you put together that proposal for your prospect. You'll be able to outline your findings, outline your recommendations for remediation. It's going to help you justify your monthly price and why you charge what you do for your services. You know, because again, a good, you know, if anybody attended my building cybersecurity programs, top advanced security programs, they're costing anywhere from $225, I've seen it as high as $350 per user per month. That's a big investment. And so if you're trying to get your customers to pay that sum of money for you, you need to show them the data. You need to show them the value. You need to show and rationalize why you do things the way you do and why you charge what you do. And this part and the amount of effort that you put into this part of the sales process is what's going to help set you apart from your competitors. It's what's going to help showcase and highlight your expertise and your skill set. You know, it's going to help you, again, get those monthly fees and those margins that top MSPs are getting. And then post-sale, your recommendations, your remediation plan, that is what's going to help you with your upfront project. That's what's going to help you, you know, with your executive business reviews, so that, you know, when you bring them on board, you should start be meeting with them on a quarterly basis or every 6 months, and you've done all that work. You've built out what needs to be done. So as you knock off each of those projects, you're basically building your pipeline. So you can say, look, we've talked about this, we've done this project, these are the next projects that need to be done to help further mitigate the risk. And so which one are we going to tackle next? So you're having that ongoing open and honest dialogue, and it stems from the work that we're doing in this stage. All right, so few takeaways and next steps. If everybody could bear with me for a couple more minutes, I'm almost done. Revisit this boot camp if you need to. I know there's a lot of information that I delivered today. It has been recorded. It is available on the Enable You underneath my particular section. Make sure if you haven't done it yet, you've downloaded the workbooks, that you've downloaded the sample reports that, or the report format that I provided. Practice. If you're not used to doing this, find those friendly customers. You know, they're already customers of yours, but go ahead, and if you didn't do an assessment like this, you know, go ahead and practice and do this kind of assessment on your existing customers so that you can refine, validate your approach, and then really work on, okay, well, what tools do I need to use to really help expedite for this? And then don't forget to register for part 3. It's taking place August 27th. Which is where we take all this information and how do we close the deal and win the client. And then lastly, just a QR code there, upcoming office hours. I have office hours. Oh, that should actually be Monday, August 19th, because I'm traveling on the 20th, so that got pushed up to the 19th. And then the boot camps that are coming up for the remainder of the summer and early September. So QR code there to register. And then if there's any European partners or North American in New York or Anaheim or Boston, our roadshows are picking up again. Sponsored by SentinelOne, Halo, and ThreatLocker. This is your ability to come spend an afternoon with us. We feed you. You get to connect with other your MSP peers and really hear about the direction, the roadmap that enables taking in regards to our backup, our security, and our RMM products. So if we happen to be in your vicinity, they're free of charge. Just go to our events page and register for that. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I know this was a long boot camp. This is one of my longest boot camps, but I appreciate everybody hanging out with me. If you have any questions as you're going through this, don't hesitate to reach out. There's my email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to help wherever I can. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good week. Take care. Talk soon. Bye.